The day my whole life collapsed didn't start with thunder or dark clouds or any of that dramatic weather nonsense you see in movies. It started with a Tuesday, a regular, boring, nothing special Tuesday. And by the time that Tuesday was done with me, I had no job, no wife, no kids, and I was sitting in a greasy diner at 4 p.m. staring at a cup of coffee like it owed me money. My phone buzzed. It was Donna. I stared at the screen for a long moment before picking up. "Don't come home tonight," she said. Just like that. No hello. No warm-up. "I'm taking the boys and going to my mother's. We're done, Ray. I filed the papers this morning." I blinked. "You filed?" "Donna, I just lost my job today." "Today?" "For hours ago." There was a pause. Not a sympathetic pause. More like the kind of pause someone gives you when they're trying not to laugh. "No," she said. "That's why I waited until today. I didn't want to deal with the drama." And then she said it. The words that hit me like a brick to the chest. "You're worthless, Ray. You always have been. I'm just done pretending otherwise." She hung up. I sat there with a dead phone pressed to my ear in a diner booth that smelled like bacon grease and old dreams. And I thought, okay, so this is what rock bottom looks like. It smells like a Tuesday and it tastes like cold coffee. And then an old man sat down across from me, uninvited, looked me dead in the eyes, and said 5 words that I will never, for as long as I live, forget. But we'll get there. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our story. Please like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Important note. This is a fictional story with dramatized elements for storytelling purposes. Any similarities to real events are completely coincidental, but the lessons about trust, betrayal, and self-protection carry very deep meaning. Now, let's continue with what happened next. My name is Raymond Carter. Ray to everyone who actually likes me, which, as of that Tuesday, felt like a very short list. I am 42 years old. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, and I spent the better part of my adult life doing what most people in Columbus do, working hard, keeping my head down, and trying to build something worth keeping. I'm not a tall man, not a short one. Average height, average build. The kind of face that people forget at parties, but remember when they need something fixed. I grew up with a father who worked 2 jobs and a mother who stretched every dollar until George Washington screamed. We were not rich. We were not poor. We were just regular people who understood that life doesn't hand you anything. You earn it or you go without. I spent 15 years in corporate finance. 15 years. I started as an entry-level analyst at a mid-sized investment firm called Hartwell Capital Group, right there in Columbus, and I clawed my way up through the ranks until I was senior portfolio manager. That's a fancy title that basically means you manage other people's money, stress yourself half to death, and get very good at pretending nothing is wrong even when everything is on fire. I married Donna 11 years ago. She was beautiful and sharp, and she laughed at all my jokes, which, looking back, should have been the first red flag because some of my jokes are genuinely terrible. We had 2 boys, Caleb, who was 9, and Owen, who was 7. Those kids were my whole world. Everything I did, every early morning and every late night, every meeting I sat through while mentally calculating how long until I could get home and play catch in the backyard, it was all for them. I thought I had it figured out. I thought I was doing everything right. I was wrong, but not in the ways I thought. If you're listening right now, let me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these stories matter. Hit that subscribe button and let's prove her wrong together. Now, let me tell you about the worst Tuesday of my life in detail. Because the details matter. The details are where the devil hides, and boy, did the devil get comfortable in my life without me noticing. I had been at Hartwell Capital for 15 years, but the last 2 of those years felt different. Tense. The new CEO, a man named Gregory Aldis, had come in from a firm in New York and immediately started making changes. The kind of changes where you smile at everyone in the meeting, and then people start disappearing from the org chart. Gregory was 50-something, silver-haired, and had the kind of handshake that was too firm on purpose. The kind that says, I am establishing dominance right now, and I need you to know it. I didn't like Gregory, but I also didn't think Gregory had any particular problem with me. I was good at my job. My portfolio numbers were strong. My clients trusted me. I had given 15 years of my life to that company. And in return, I thought I had security, stability, a future. On that Tuesday morning, Gregory called me into his office at 9 a.m. His assistant, a nervous young woman named Priya, who could never quite look people in the eye, said to bring my badge and my laptop. That's the corporate version of a last meal. You don't bring your badge to a performance review. Gregory sat behind his enormous desk and told me, without a single flicker of genuine regret, that the company was restructuring and my position was being eliminated. He slid a termination agreement across the desk with one hand and offered me a box of tissues with the other, like I was a cry in front of him. I didn't take the tissues. I almost laughed, which would have been worse. He said I had made some decisions recently that didn't align with the firm's direction. He was vague about it, deliberately, carefully vague, the way people are when they know the real reason won't hold up in a courtroom. I tried to push. I asked him to be specific. He smiled, that too firm handshake smile, and said the details were outlined in the separation agreement. I signed nothing. I took nothing. I walked out of that building with my phone, my car keys, and 15 years of loyalty that had apparently been worth exactly $0 and 0 cents. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, just breathing. Then I drove to a diner 3 blocks away called Miller's, one of those places that's been there since 1974 and hasn't changed the menu once, which is either charming or deeply concerning depending on your feelings about meatloaf. I ordered coffee. The coffee was terrible. I drank it anyway because it gave my hand something to do. That's when Donna called. And that's when everything I thought I understood about my life turned out to be a story I'd been telling myself. After she hung up, I sat in that booth for a long time. The lunch crowd had thinned out, and it was that quiet in-between hour where diners feel a little lonely and the light comes through the windows at a low angle, and everything looks both very clear and very sad at the same time. There was a waitress named Bev. I know her name because it was on her name tag, and also because she refilled my coffee 3 times without being asked, which is the highest form of human kindness. And she kept giving me that look, the look that says, honey, I don't know what happened, but you look like you got run over by something heavy. I was sitting there, turning my coffee cup in circles on the table, when someone sat down across from me. I looked up. He was old. I mean, genuinely, impressively old, the kind of old that commands a certain respect just on principle, like he had survived enough things that the universe had decided to leave him alone. He had white hair, sharp blue eyes, and a face that had been deeply weathered by what I guessed was decades of living outside some very comfortable office. He was wearing a flannel shirt, clean but worn at the elbows, and he carried a paper bag from a pharmacy that crinkled when he set it down beside him. He hadn't been invited. There were other empty booths. He sat across from me like we had a standing appointment. You look like my son, he said. He studied my face the way you'd look at a photograph you found in a box and weren't sure who it was. He's been missing for 35 years. I stared at him. I'm sorry, I said, because what else do you say to that? He nodded slowly. You carry it the same way he did. That look, like the world just told you it doesn't need you anymore. I didn't know what to say to that either, so I just nodded. He extended his hand across the table. Frank Hollis. Ray Carter. You want to talk about it, Ray Carter? Not particularly, I said. Good, he said. I find people talk more honestly when they don't want to. Go ahead. And here's the embarrassing part. I did. I don't know why. Maybe because he was a stranger and it didn't matter. Maybe because Bev had refilled my terrible coffee enough times that I'd had slightly too much caffeine and it had loosened something. Maybe because when you've lost everything in the span of one morning, the usual social rules stop seeming that important. I told him about the job. I told him about Donna. I told him about Caleb and Owen and how the thought of not seeing them every day felt like a physical hole in my chest. I talked for a long time. Frank Hollis listened in that particular way old people sometimes can, completely still, without checking his phone or glancing at the door or making those little impatient sounds that younger people make when they're waiting for their turn to talk. When I finally ran out of words, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said the 5 words. You don't know the half. I looked at him. What? He reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a card. Not a business card. Just a plain white card with a name and number written on it in neat, old-fashioned handwriting. Call this woman, he said. Her name is Elaine Marsh. She's a lawyer. Tell her Frank sent you. He slid the card across the table. And then, Ray, I want you to find out exactly why you were fired. Not the story they told you. The real story. He stood up, picked up his pharmacy bag, and gave me one more long look. My son disappeared when he was 38, he said quietly. Never found out what happened. You got 2 boys who are going to need their father to stand back up. He tapped the table once with 2 fingers. So, stand back up. And then he walked out of Miller's Diner, and I sat there holding a white card with a lawyer's name on it. And for the first time all day, something in me shifted. Not hope, exactly. More like a very stubborn refusal to stay down. Now, before I tell you what Elaine Marsh found, and what she found was a depth of betrayal that I had genuinely not seen coming, let me tell you what I thought was going to happen. I thought I was going to fight a routine wrongful termination case, get a small settlement, lick my wounds, and figure out what came next. That's what I thought. I did not think I was going to uncover a conspiracy that connected my firing my wife and Gregory Aldis in a way that, when it was laid out in front of me, made me feel like a fool and made me furious in equal measure. But that's what happened. I called Elaine Marsh the next morning from a motel room I was paying for with the emergency credit card I kept for business travel. The one Donna didn't know about, which turned out to be useful since she had already frozen our joint accounts. I know. I'm not going to editorialize. I'm just going to let that sit there. Elaine picked up on the second ring. Frank called me last night, she said, before I could finish introducing myself. He told me to expect you. Tell me everything. She was sharp, not sharp in a cold way. Sharp in the way of someone who has heard a lot of stories and can find the important thread in 3 minutes flat. She asked me specific questions about my employment contract, about the non-compete clause I'd signed 4 years ago, about whether I had any documentation of my performance reviews, about exactly what Gregory had said in that meeting and what words he used. Then she asked me something I wasn't expecting. Has your wife been in contact with anyone at Hartwell Capital recently? Outside of normal social situations, I paused. Why would she be? Elaine was quiet for just a beat too long. I'm going to look into a few things, she said. Can you get me copies of your last 3 performance reviews and your employment contract? I have them in my home office, but I can't exactly. Do you have cloud backup? I did. I'm a finance guy. I back up everything. It's practically a personality disorder. Good, she said. Send them to me today. I'll be in touch within 48 hours. She was in touch in 36. If you've been following the story this far, do me a favor and pause for just a second. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time because where this story goes next, you won't want to miss it. And I'd hate for you to lose the thread. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and let's keep going. Because what Elaine found changes everything. What Elaine found was this. Gregory Aldis had joined Hartwell Capital 18 months before I was fired. In those 18 months, He had quietly been building a case against me, not because my performance was suffering, but because he needed me gone. And the reason he needed me gone had to do with a client portfolio I managed, a family account worth close to $40 million held by a man named Burton Wexler, a real estate developer who had been with the firm since before Gregory arrived. Burton trusted me specifically. He had made it clear in writing that if there was ever a significant change in his portfolio management, he would pull his account. Gregory wanted that account. He had a different investment strategy in mind for Burton Wexler's money, one that I later understood involved quietly shifting funds in ways that were not illegal, but were not exactly in Burton's best interest either. It was the kind of thing that's hard to prove and easy to explain away, and it would have been very profitable for certain people at the firm. I was the obstacle. So Gregory had spent 18 months collecting and sometimes manufacturing grievances. Little things. A report filed late because of a family emergency. A client call I'd handed off to a junior analyst when I was traveling. Small things that individually meant nothing, but stacked up to look like a pattern. The kind of thin paper trail you need when you're firing someone who has actually done nothing wrong. But here's where it gets personal. Elaine found emails. Not many. Enough. Gregory Aldis and Donna had been in contact. Not professionally. Personally. They had met at a company event 2 years prior. One of those firm holiday parties where spouses come along and everyone stands around drinking mediocre wine and making conversation they don't mean. Gregory had apparently been charmed by Donna, and Donna, who I now understood had been deeply unhappy in our marriage for reasons she had never once bothered to mention to me, had been charmed right back. The emails were careful. They weren't stupid people, but they were enough. In one email, Gregory mentioned that things at work were progressing. In another, Donna mentioned she had started talking to her lawyer. The timing was not coincidental. The two events, my termination and Donna's filing, were coordinated. She had known the firing was coming. She had waited until the day it happened to pull the trigger on the divorce, on freezing the accounts, on taking the kids. They had planned it together. I sat with that information for about 3 full minutes without moving or speaking. Elaine waited on the other end of the line with the patience of a woman who had delivered bad news before and understood that people needed a moment. Then I said very calmly, "What can we do?" And Elaine said also very calmly, quite a lot actually. "Here is what happens when you have a very good lawyer, documented proof of a coordinated campaign to wrongfully terminate an employee, and evidence that said employee's spouse had prior knowledge of and involvement in that termination that directly affected divorce proceedings. You stop being the person things happen to. You become the person things happen for." Elaine filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against Hartwell Capital and Gregory Aldis personally within 2 weeks of that first phone call. The lawsuit detailed the pattern of manufactured grievances, the timeline that connected Gregory's arrival to the systematic building of a false case against me, and the financial motive, the Burton Wexler account. Burton himself, when Elaine reached out to him directly, was not happy. Burton was, in fact, furious. He had no idea any of this had been going on under his nose, and he was the kind of man who responded to being played for a fool by calling his own team of lawyers before noon. Burton Wexler pulled his $40 million account from Hartwell Capital the same week our lawsuit was filed. He also gave a deposition. The firm's legal team, who had clearly not anticipated that I would do anything other than quietly accept my severance and go away, began to panic in the quiet, expensive way that lawyers panic, through increasingly large settlement offers delivered through intermediaries. Elaine told me to wait. She was also simultaneously working on the divorce case. The evidence of Donna's prior knowledge of the termination was, in the language of family court, significant. It demonstrated that Donna had information that materially affected the marital estate. She had known our income was about to be eliminated and had acted to secure assets before I had any chance to respond. In Ohio, that kind of thing matters. A lot. Donna's lawyer, who had clearly been expecting this to be a simple case of a wife leaving a suddenly unemployed man, was no longer acting quite as confident. And through all of this, there was Caleb and Owen. The boys were staying with Donna at her mother's house in Dublin, a suburb north of Columbus. I was allowed to see them every other weekend under the temporary custody arrangement, which was the part that genuinely broke my heart in ways the job and the betrayal did not. Caleb was old enough to sense that something serious had happened, and he had taken on this quiet, watchful quality that I recognized, because it's what I used to do as a kid when things felt unstable. Owen was 7 and largely operating on the theory that all of this was temporary and Dad would be home soon, which was both easier and harder to deal with. On my first visitation weekend, I took them to a Columbus Clippers game, minor league baseball, the way God intended baseball to be watched, in a small stadium with cheap hot dogs and no corporate luxury boxes. Owen ate 3 hot dogs and declared the third one a mistake, with a kind of serious conviction that only a 7-year-old can muster about a hot dog. Caleb sat next to me and watched the game and eventually, in the 7th inning, leaned his head against my shoulder without saying anything. I didn't say anything either. We just watched the game. In those moments, everything Elaine was doing in the background, all the legal filings and the depositions and the discovery requests, felt very far away. What felt close was my son's head on my shoulder and the smell of cut grass and popcorn and the sound of a bat connecting with a ball on a warm Ohio evening. I was not going to let them grow up thinking their father stayed down. Now let me tell you about the day the settlement offer came that actually meant something. It was a Thursday, about 5 months after that Tuesday in Miller's Diner. Elaine called me at 8 in the morning, which was unusual because Elaine normally operated in the civilized hours of 9 to 6, and anything outside those hours was serious. They want to settle, she said. Gregory is being pushed out. The board is not happy about the Burton Wexler situation or the depositions. They're offering a number. She told me the number. I was standing in the kitchen of the small apartment I'd rented in Clintonville, a decent neighborhood, decent apartment, nothing fancy but mine. And I set down my coffee mug very carefully because I didn't trust my hands. That's, I started, substantially more than what we asked for initially, Elaine said. She sounded like she was trying to be professional about it, but there was something very satisfied in her voice. They also want a non-disparagement clause, which we'll negotiate. But Ray, this is a strong number. We negotiated for another 2 weeks. We got the number we wanted, and we stripped most of the non-disparagement clause down to something that didn't require me to pretend Gregory Aldis was a good person. Gregory Aldis, for his part, resigned from Hartwell Capital before the settlement was finalized. The official statement was that he was pursuing other opportunities. That's corporate, for he's leaving before we have to fire him, and everyone knows it. I heard through a former colleague that he moved back to New York. I have not lost a single night of sleep over what happens to Gregory Aldis in New York. Not one. The divorce case resolved a few months after that. Ohio is not a community property state. It divides marital assets equitably, which means fairly given the circumstances. The circumstances in our case included, among other things, a judge who had read the deposition evidence and was not particularly warm in her responses to Donna's legal team. Donna had gone into this expecting to walk away with the house, a strong alimony arrangement, and primary custody. She had gone in expecting me to be a man with no job, no income, and no fight left. She got the house. We agreed on that because the boys needed stability, and uprooting them from their neighborhood didn't serve anyone. But equitable division of the marital assets, combined with the evidence of her foreknowledge of my financial situation, resulted in a settlement that was considerably less than what Donna had expected. Her lawyer's confidence had not recovered since Elaine got involved. Custody was adjusted. Joint legal custody, alternating weeks with both of us. The boys keeping their school and their friends and their routines. Caleb's baseball practices on Tuesdays. Owen's obsession with building things, which had recently advanced from Lego to a genuine interest in woodworking that I was absolutely encouraging, because a kid who can build things is a kid who understands that problems have solutions. Was it perfect? No. Perfect doesn't exist in custody arrangements. There's always a birthday someone misses, a school play where the seating is awkward, a handoff in a parking lot that feels strange. But my boys knew their father didn't disappear. Their father showed up. Their father kept showing up. Let me tell you something about Frank Hollis, because I owe him that. About 8 months after our meeting in Miller's Diner, I tracked him down. It wasn't hard. Elaine knew who he was. Turns out Frank Hollis was something of a legend in Columbus legal circles, though not as a lawyer himself. He was a retired businessman who had built and sold a successful regional logistics company in the 90s, and he had spent the last 2 decades occasionally passing the card of Elaine Marsh to people he encountered who were in trouble and too beaten down to look for help themselves. He did it quietly. He didn't make a thing of it. His son had indeed gone missing. 35 years ago, Thomas Hollis, aged 38, had walked out his life one day and never come back. No explanation ever found. Frank had spent years looking and eventually reached the painful place where you stop looking because looking is keeping you from living. I found Frank at a coffee shop in German Village, a different part of Columbus, old brick streets and renovated houses, a quieter neighborhood. He was reading a newspaper, an actual paper newspaper. He looked up when I sat down and seemed neither surprised nor particularly put out. "You look better," he said. "I am better," I said. "I wanted to say thank you, and I wanted to ask you something." He put the newspaper down. "Ask? Why, me," I said. "Why did you sit down in that diner? You didn't know me." Frank was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee cup and looked at it like there might be an answer somewhere at the bottom. "Thomas used to sit like that," he said finally. Head down, shoulders in, like he was trying to take up as little space as possible, like he was apologizing for existing. He looked at me. I've never been able to walk past that. I tried once a long time ago. I kept walking in Thomas. Well, I kept walking once, and I've never forgiven myself for it. So now I don't. There was nothing useful to say to that. So I just nodded. We sat in that coffee shop for 2 hours. We talked about his son. We talked about my boys. We talked about Columbus, about the logistics business, about the specific way Ohio winters have a way of making you philosophical whether you want to be or not. He was funny in a dry, understated way, the kind of humor where the joke is over before you realize there was one and you're laughing at something you almost missed. Before I left, I asked him if there was anything I could do for him. He thought about it seriously, which I appreciated. He didn't wave it off. "There's a shelter on the east side," he said. "Family shelter. I've been contributing for years. They need people who can do financial planning work pro bono, help families get stable. You're a finance man." He gave me a look that was almost a smile. "Do something useful with that." I said I would. I did. But before all of that, before the coffee shop in German Village and the pro bono financial work and the Tuesday night visits to build Legos with Owen and the Saturday baseball practices with Caleb, before any of the good things that came after, there's one final piece of the story that I didn't expect. This is the part I'm almost reluctant to tell you, because it makes me feel complicated things. And I'm a man who was raised to believe complicated feelings are best expressed through silence and yard work. But it matters to the story, so I'll tell it. Are you still with me? Good. Because if you've made it this far and you're not subscribed, this is your sign. Subscribe now, leave a comment, tell me where you're watching from. Because what happened next, I still think about more than anything else in this whole story. About 10 months after that Tuesday, after the lawsuit, after the divorce settlement, after Gregory had packed up and gone back to New York with his firm handshake and his manufactured paper trail, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up. Is this Raymond Carter? A woman's voice. Careful, measured. Who's asking? A pause. My name is Vivian Aldis. Gregory Aldis is my husband. Another pause. My ex-husband, as of last month. I said nothing. I was very still. I have information, she said, about what happened at Hartwell, about Gregory's activities there and at other firms before yours. I've been talking to I thought you should know, because what Gregory did to you was part of a pattern he's been running for years. And you're not the only person he did it to. I sat down. I had been standing in my kitchen again. I do a lot of standing kitchens. And I sat down. Why are you telling me? I asked. Her voice was steady, and I heard something in it that I recognized, because I had felt it myself 10 months ago in a diner smelling like bacon grease and old dreams. The specific, quiet fury of someone who has been made a fool of by someone they trusted. Because I want him to answer for it, she said. And because you have the documentation that supports what I'm bringing to the SEC. Your lawsuit established a paper trail. I need you to be willing to cooperate with an investigation. Gregory Aldis was not a man who only played one game. It turned out he had done variations of the same scheme at 2 previous firms. Identify a high-value account. Build a case against the manager whose client loyalty was an obstacle. Remove the manager. Redirect the account. Extract fees in ways that were complicated to explain, but clear in pattern once you knew what you were looking for. Vivian had known, in the vague way, that spouses sometimes know things they tell themselves they don't know, that something wasn't right. When he lost his position at Hartwell and became volatile and unpleasant in ways she could no longer rationalize, she stopped not knowing. She cooperated with the SEC. I cooperated with the SEC. Burton Wexler cooperated enthusiastically with the SEC, in the way that only people who have had their money messed with can muster. Gregory Aldis was charged with securities fraud, not fired, not relocated to New York, not quietly managing his career consequences over drinks at a good restaurant. Charged, formally and significantly charged, with the kind of paperwork that follows a person around and doesn't let them run another scheme in a new city with a new firm. His lawyers were good. His lawyers were very expensive and good. The process was long, and I won't pretend I followed every step of it, because honestly, by the time the charges were formal, I had started to build a new life, and I was more interested in my new life than in watching Gregory Aldis's old one unravel. I cared that it was happening. I didn't need to watch every moment. What I heard eventually was that he took a plea, lesser charges, a substantial fine, a 5-year ban from the securities industry. Not nothing. Not justice in the way movies showed justice. No handcuffs, no courtroom drama, but real, permanent consequences that he carries now and will carry. His name means something very specific when people in certain financial circles look it up. Donna, I'll be honest with you about Donna, because she's the mother of my sons, and the honest version of this story is more useful than the satisfying one. She made terrible choices. She chose a man who was running a scheme and told her what she wanted to hear. She thought she was trading up, and she ended up on the wrong side of an SEC investigation because some of her communications with Gregory were reviewed as part of the broader case. She wasn't charged, she hadn't known enough and hadn't done enough to be charged. But the experience changed her in visible ways. She was quieter, more careful. She stopped making the kinds of sweeping declarations she had once been famous for. She never apologized to me directly. I didn't expect one. I had stopped needing one somewhere around the time Caleb's team won their first game of the season, and I watched my kid round third base with his arms out like he was flying. And I thought, this is what I'm here for, not the apology. What I am is a 42-year-old man who lost everything in one Tuesday and spent the next year finding out that what looked like losing everything was actually the moment the story changed directions. I left Hartwell Capital's world behind. I didn't go back to a large firm. I started a small independent practice, just me and two partners, one of whom is a former colleague who quit Hartwell 2 months after Gregory's arrival because he had better instincts than I did. We work with families, with small business owners, with people who need financial guidance and don't have access to the kind of resources that large firms offer to large clients. It's slower. It's smaller. It's mine. The family shelter Frank Hollis mentioned, I go there twice a month. I sit with families who are trying to figure out how to build stability from very little, and I help them make plans. It turns out 15 years of managing portfolios translates pretty directly into helping a single mother figure out how to build an emergency fund and a path to something better. It's not complicated work. It's just work that matters. My boys. Caleb is 11 now. He has decided he wants to be an architect, which he announced over dinner one night with the total certainty that only middle school kids can generate about their future careers. I told him that was a great plan and then spent an hour that night reading about what architects actually do so I could have an informed conversation with him about it. Owen is 9 and has, in fact, built a small bookshelf in my garage. It is slightly uneven and completely magnificent. It holds 3 books, a baseball, and a rock he found at the river that he considers important. That bookshelf is the best thing in my apartment. Frank Hollis came to dinner at my apartment in the spring. He brought a bottle of wine that was better than anything I would have bought and ate 3 helpings of the pot roast I made, which was a legitimate triumph for a man who had previously considered his cooking skills adequate at best. We played cards after dinner. All 4 of us, Frank and me and Caleb and Owen. Frank taught the boys gin rummy with the seriousness of a man passing on a sacred tradition, and Owen beat him twice, which Frank insisted was cheating, and which Owen insisted was strategy. Watching Frank Hollis teach my boys to play cards was, I don't have better words for it than this. It was one of the best evenings of my life. He still comes to dinner sometimes. He's not a replacement for anything. He's just Frank. He's just the man who sat down across from me in a diner when everything was gone and said, "You don't know the half," and turned out to be right. I think about the version of myself sitting in that Miller's Diner booth, turning the coffee cup in circles, phone dead on the table, everything gone. I think about what I would tell that man now. Not that it gets better. That's what everyone says, and it's both true and useless in the moment. Not that you'll be okay, same problem. What I would tell him is this: find out why. Don't accept the story they're telling you. Find out the real story, because the real story is where the power is. The real story is what lets you stop being the person things happen to. The rest takes care of itself. Not perfectly, not without cost, but it takes care of itself. If you're watching this and you're in your own version of that diner booth, if you're in that terrible quiet between losing something and knowing what comes next, I hope the story found you when it needed to. I hope you find your Elaine Marsh, your Frank Hollis, your Tuesday that changes direction. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this one, you know what to do. Subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. Because every time I see a comment from somewhere I've never been, I think about how strange and large the world is and how many diners there are in it with people turning coffee cups in circles, waiting for something to shift. The bookshelf is still a little uneven, but it stands.